How's it going, guys? Limelight Capital here, back for another video. So this is going to be House of Cards Part 2. I do have House of Cards Part 1 on the channel already, for anyone that doesn't know. So yeah, guys, let's just jump right into it. Just a quick reminder before we start, please leave a like on the video. It's much appreciated. Trying to gain some traction, definitely trying to do stuff for the community. I don't do these read alouds, for myself. I'm a person that likes listening to stuff instead of, versus reading. I feel like I digest it better, and, sometimes you're busy and you just want to listen. I find myself in the kitchen when I'm making food, I want to listen to stuff and whatever, so, I do this to be of service. None of these videos are monetized. This channel isn't even big enough to be monetized, so you guys don't have to worry about the fact that I have ill intentions. But yeah, guys, let's just jump right in here. So this is a post by Atobitt, the legendary Atobitt. Again, this is House of Cards Part 2. So there's in the top there are links to his other posts for anyone that's curious. If you want to read some of this, there are links in his posts. It starts with a TLDR and it says, "No freaking way I can do that." Alright, guys, so this is going to be a long one. I am going to be taking just a couple water breaks in between, so if you hear a pause, please don't mind that. But yeah, let's go. So it starts off, I guess it's broken down into sections. So it starts off with section 1, and that section is called Pilot. Alright. I wasn't looking into GameStop when all of this began. Most of my time was spent researching the pandemic's impact on the economy. I'm talking about the economic steam engine that employs people and puts food on their tables, especially the small businesses that were executively steamrolled by COVID lockdowns. It was scary how fast they had to close their doors. I spent a lot of time looking at companies like GameStop. Brick and mortar businesses were basically running out of bricks to shit. Frankly, GameStop looked a lot like the next Blockbuster, and it just seemed like a matter of time before they went under. Had DFE or Roaring Kitty not done his homework, it's possible we wouldn't have a rocket to hold or a story to told. However, has had a short position with GameStop was probably thinking the same thing. Oh, see, I read that wrong. I'm sorry. Whoever has or had a short position with GameStop was probably thinking the same thing. The number of shares that can be freely traded on a daily basis is referred to as the float. GameStop has 70 million shares outstanding, with 50 million shares representing the float. With a small float like this, a short position of 20% becomes significant. Heck, Volkswagen got squozed with just a 12.8% short position. So let's use numbers to walk through an example of how this works. Assume Volkswagen has 100 shares outstanding. If 12.8% of the company has been sold short, then 12.8 shares, let's round it up to 13, must be available to purchase at a later date, assuming Volkswagen doesn't go bankrupt. However, Volkswagen had a float of 45%, which meant there was no real strain to cover that 12.8% short position at any moment. However, when Porsche announced they wanted to increase their position in Volkswagen, they invested heavily. The kicker was that Porsche owned 43% of Volkswagen shares, 32% in options, and the government owns 20% in plain terms. It meant that the actual available float went from 45% down to 1% of outstanding shares. Let's revisit our scenario. With 100 shares outstanding and 13 shares sold short, what happens if only one share was able to cover instead of 45? Well, this. And there is a chart. There's a chart. Looks like the yearly chart for Volkswagen, and it shows back in 2009 when the price went from about maybe 250, 300 euros all the way up to well over, I think it was in the thousands. So moving on, GameStop is or was the victim of price suppression throughout short selling. I discussed this topic with Dr. T and Carl Hagberg in our AMAs. Every transaction has two sides, a buy and a sell. Short selling artificially increases the supply of shares and causes the price to decline. When this happens, the price can only increase if demand exceeds the increase in supply. I started looking closely at GameStop after confirming their reported short position of 140%. It's important for me to explain why this is so much different than the Volkswagen example. 140% of GameStop's float was sold short. There were 50 million shares in that float, so 140% of this was equal to the 70 million shares the company has outstanding. This means at least 100% of their outstanding shares had been sold short. Now compare that to Volkswagen, where the short position was only 12.8%. Simply put, it is mathematically impossible to cover more than 100% of a company's outstanding stock. The peak of the Volkswagen squeeze was reached when the demand for shares became surpassed by the supply of those shares. Here, demand represents 12.8% of their stock, which must be available to close the short position. With only 1% of shares available, this guarantee is squeezed until the number of shares available to trade could satisfy the remaining short interest. When a company has a short position with more than 100% of total shares outstanding, the preceding argument is thrown out the window. Supply cannot surpass demand because the company can only issue 100% of itself at any given time. Therefore, the additional 40% can only be explained by multiple people claiming ownership of the same share. Surely this is a mistake though, right? I thought this level of short selling was impossible. Until I saw the number of short selling violations issued by FINRA. As we go through these FINRA reports, there are a few things to keep in mind. 1. FINRA is not part of the government. FINRA is a nonprofit entity with regulatory powers set by Congress. This makes FINRA the largest self-regulatory organization, or SRO, in the U.S. The SEC is responsible for setting rules which protect individual investors. FINRA is responsible for overseeing most of the brokers, collectively referred to as members, in the U.S. As an SRO, FINRA sets the rules by which their members must comply. They are not directly regulated by the SEC. FINRA investigates cases at their own pace. When looking at the date initiated on their reports, it is not synonymous with date of occurrence. Many times, FINRA will not say when a problem occurred, just resolved. It can be years after the initial occurrence. The DTC participant report is littered with cases that were initiated in 2019 but occurred in 2015, etc. Many of the violations occurring today will take years to discover. Number 3, FINRA can issue a violation for each occurrence using a one-to-one format. When it comes to violations like short selling, however, these occurrences can last months or even years. When this happens, FINRA issues a violation for multiple occurrences using a one-to-many format. I discussed this event in Citadel Has No Clothes, where one violation represented 4 years of market fuckery. What's shitty is that FINRA doesn't tell you which violations are which. You have to read each line and see if they mention a date range of occurrence within each record. If they don't, you must assume it was for one event. Brutal. Number 4, FINRA's investment portfolio is held by the same entities they are issuing violations to. Let that sink in for a minute. So, on to the next section. This is section 2. State your case. Can you think of a reason why short sellers would want to understate their short positions? Put yourself in their situation and imagine you're running a hedge fund. You operate in a self-regulated environment and your records are basically private. If the SEC asks you to justify suspicious behavior, you really don't have to provide it. The worst that can happen is a slap on the wrist. I wrote about this exact thing in Citadel Has No Clothes. They received a cease and desist order from the SEC on December 10th, 2018 for failing to submit complete and accurate records. This occurred from November 2012 through April of 2016 and contained deficient information for over 80 million trades. Their punishment? $3.5 million. So why even bother keeping an honest ledger? Now suppose you short a bunch of shares into the market. When you report this to FINRA, they require you to mark the transaction with a short sale indicator. In doing so, FINRA builds a paper trail to your short selling activity. However, if you omit this indicator, FINRA can't distinguish that transaction from a long sale. Who else would there be to hold you accountable for covering your position? This is especially true for self-clearing organizations like Citadel because there are less parties involved to hold you accountable for record keeping. If FINRA thinks you physically own those shares and sold them on a long sale, they have no reason to revisit that transaction in the future. You could literally pocket the cash and dump the commitment to cover. Another very important advantage is that it allows short sellers to artificially increase the supply of shares while understating the outstanding short interest on that security. The supply of shares being sold will drive down the price, while the short interest on the stock remains the same. So aside from paying a fine, how could you possibly lose by forgetting to mark that trade with a short sale indicator? It would seem the system almost incentivizes this type of behavior. I combed through the DTC participant report and found enough dirt to fill the empty chasm that is Ken Griffin's soul. Take a guess at what their most common short selling violation is. I'm going to assume you said failing to properly mark a short sale transaction. For the record, I just want to say I called this in March, and when I wrote Citadel has no clothes. Citadel has one of the highest concentrations of short selling violations in their FINRA report. At the time, I didn't fully understand the consequences of this violation. After seeing how many participants received the same penalty, it finally made sense. There are roughly 240 participant account names on the DTC's list. Shit you not, I looked at every short selling violation that was published on brokercheck.finra.org. To be fair, I eliminated participants with only one or two violations related to short selling. There were plenty of bigger fish to fry. I literally picked the first participant at the top of the list and found 3 violations for short selling. Cracks knuckles. ABM AMRO Clearing Chicago LLC, or the AACC, is the third largest bank in the Netherlands. They got popped for 3 short selling violations, one of which included a failure to deliver. In total, they have 78 violations from FINRA. Several of those are severe compared to their violations for short selling. However, the short selling violations reveal the much bigger story. So there's a picture here, and this is from that same FINRA report. There's a highlighted portion I will read here. It says, it failed to report short interest positions to the New York Stock Exchange and FINRA, for example, for sample settlement dates, and submitted to FINRA an inaccurate short interest position report. The findings stated that the firm's supervisory system did not provide for supervision reasonably designed to achieve compliance with respect to the applicable securities laws and regulations and FINRA and NASDAQ rules concerning short interest reporting. So ABN submitted inaccurate short interest position to the New York Stock Exchange and FINRA and lacked the proper supervisory systems to comply with practically everything. In 2014, AMRO forked over 95 grand to settle this and didn't even say they were sorry. In these situations, it's easy to think, meh, could have been a fluke event. So I took a closer look and found violations by the same participants, which made it harder to argue their case of sheer negligence. Here are a couple from AMRO. There's another picture here, and it says, the CFTC issued an order filing and settling charges against the firm for failing to segregate or secure sufficient customer funds, failing to meet the minimum net capital requirements, failure to maintain accurate books and records, and failure to supervise its employees. ABN AMRO got slapped with $1 million fine for understating capital requirements, failing to maintain accurate books, and failing to supervise their employees. If you mess up once or twice, but end up fixing the problem, great. When your primary business is to clear trades and you fail this bad, there's a much bigger problem going on. It gets hard to defend this as an accident when every stage of the trade recording process is fundamentally flawed. The following screenshot came from the same violation, and it reads, improperly used a customer's withdrawn warehouse receipts as collateral for margining purposes. Without these warehouse receipts, the customer's accounts were under-margined on several occasions. Warehouse receipts are like the receipts you get after buying lumber online. You can print these out and take them to Home Depot, where you exchange them for actual lumber in the store. Instead of trading the actual goods, you can trade a warehouse receipt instead. So yeah, since this one record allowed AMRO to meet their customers' margin requirement, it seems extremely suspicious that they didn't appropriately remove it once they were withdrawn. Do I think this was an accident? F no, because FINRA reported them 8 years later for doing the same damn thing. Another picture, it says, it understated the portfolio margin requirements for accounts at various points in time. The findings stated that the firm incorrectly treated certain OTC equity securities that are not margin eligible as marginable securities. As a consequence, the firm understated the margin requirements for these accounts by millions of dollars. Once again, AMRO got caught understating their margin requirements. Last time, they used the value of withdrawn warehouse receipts to meet their margin requirements. Here, they're using securities which weren't eligible for margin to meet their margin requirements. You can paint an apple orange, but it's still an apple. The bullshit I read about in these reports doesn't really shock me anymore. It's actually the opposite. You begin to expect bigger fines as they set higher benchmarks for misconduct. When I find a case like AMRO, I'll usually put more time into it because certain citations represent puzzle pieces. Once you find enough pieces, you can see the bigger picture, so believe me when I say I was genuinely shocked by the detailed report on this case. Another picture, it says, from April 2007 until July 2015, AAC, which is the company above, understated the portfolio margin requirements for 22 accounts at various points in time. It incorrectly treated certain OTC securities which are not margin eligible as margin securities. So it's, yeah, this has been going on for 8 effing years. Without a doubt, this is a great example of a violation where the misconduct supposedly ended in 2015 but took another 4 years for FINRA to publish the damn report. If my math is correct, the 8-year relevant period plus the 4-year FINRA spent, I don't know, reviewing, yields a total of 12 years. In other words, from the time this problem started to the time it was publicized by FINRA, the kids in first grade had graduated from high school. Does anyone else think these self-regulatory organizations are doing a terrible job of self-regulating? How can we trust these situations are appropriately monitored if it takes 12 years for a shit blossom to bloom? Oh, and I almost forgot. After understating their margin requirements in 22 accounts over 8 years, AMRO paid only $150,000 fine to settle the dust. I know that was a shitload of information, so let me summarize it for you. One of the most common citations occurs when a firm accidentally marks a short sale as long, or misreports short interest positions to FINRA. When a short sale occurs, that transaction should be marked with a short sale indicator. Despite this, many participants do it to avoid the borrow requirements set by the regulation SHO. If they mark a short sale as long, they are not required to locate a borrow because FINRA doesn't know it's a short sale. This is why so many of these FINRA violations include a statement about the broker failing to locate a borrow along with a failure to mark a short sale indicator on the transaction. It literally means the broker was naked short selling a stock and telling FINRA they physically owned that share. Suddenly, a small violation had much bigger implications. The number of short shares that have been excluded from the short interest calculation is directly related to those violations. And there are hundreds of them. Who knows how many companies have underreported short interest positions? To be clear, I did not choose them based on the amount of dirt they had. AMRO's violations were like grains of sand on a beach, and it's going to take a lot of dirt to fill the bottomless pit that is Ken Griffin's soul. Frankly, AMRO wouldn't get us there with 10,000 FINRA violations. So without further ado, let's get dirty. So I believe this is part 3 here. When FINRA publishes one of their reports, the granular details like numbers and dates are often left out. This makes it impossible to determine how systematic a particular issue might be. For example, if you know that XYZ failed to comply with FINRA's short interest reporting requirements, your only conclusion is that the violation occurred. However, if you know that XYZ failed to comply with FINRA's short interest reporting requirements on 15,000 transactions during 2020, you can start investigating the magnitude of that violation. If XYZ only completed 100,000 transactions in 2020, it means 15% of their transactions failed to meet requirements. This represents a major systemic risk to XYZ and the parties it conducts business with. I spent some time analyzing Apex Clearing Corporation after I left AMRO. Apex is 8th on the list and the second participant I found with an evident short-selling problem. In 2019, FINRA initiated a case against Apex for doing the same stuff as AMRO. However, the magnitude of this violation really put things into perspective. I got a small taste of how effed up this house of cards truly is. Another picture here. It says the firm failed to comply with FINRA's short interest reporting requirements and related supervision obligations. The findings stated that the firm experienced an issue in its short interest reporting logic that excluded certain short interest positions from the firm's submissions to FINRA. The firm failed to establish and maintain a supervisory system, including WSPs, to confirm that its reporting system captured all reportable short interest positions. The firm did not have a supervisory system to review for the accuracy of the firm's short interest positions reported to FINRA. This is practically a template of the first AMRO violation we discussed. To see the difference, we need to look at their letter of acceptance, waiver, and consent. So another picture, it reads, during the review period, the firm experienced an issue in its short interest reporting logic that excluded certain short interest positions. Okay. Specifically, Apex instructed its correspondent broker-dealer customers to book short positions into either a Type 1 cash or Type 5 short margin accounts. Unbeknownst to Apex, certain correspondent broker-dealers were booking short positions into another account available to them, Type 2 margin accounts. The short positions booked into this account were not included in the firm's submissions to FINRA. For two sample settlement dates during the 47-month review period, the firm failed to report 256 short interest positions totaling 481,000 shares, and inaccurately reported 130 short interest positions totaling 1.6 million 1.6 million shares when it should have reported 130 short positions totaling 2.528 million shares. Let's break this down step by step. Apex had an issue for 47 months where certain customers recorded their short positions in an account which was not being sent to FINRA. It only takes a few wrinkles on the brain to realize this is a problem. The sample data tells us just how bad this problem is. When you see the term settlement days, think T+2. Apex follows the T+2 settlement period for both cash accounts and margin accounts, which means the trade should clear 2 days after the original trade date. When you buy stock on Monday, it should settle by Wednesday. Okay, quick math. There are roughly 252 trading days in 1 year after removing weekends and holidays. Throughout the 47-month review period, we can safely assume that Apex had roughly 987 settlement dates. In other words, 256 misstated reports over 47 months is more than one misstatement per week for nearly 4 years. Tell me again, how is this trivial? The wording of the sample settlement section is a bit ambiguous. It doesn't clarify if those were the only two settlement dates they sampled or if they were the only settlement dates with reportable issues. Honestly, I would be shocked if it was the latter because auditors don't examine every record, but I can't be certain. Anyway, FINRA discovered 256 short interest positions consisting of 481,000 shares were incorrectly excluded from their short interest report. In addition, they understated the share count by 879,321 in 130 separate short interest positions. Together, this makes 1.36 million shares that were excluded from the short interest calculation. When you realize nearly 1.5 million excluded shares were discovered in just 2 settlement periods, and there were almost 1,000 dates to choose from, it seriously dilates the imagination. Once again, FINRA wiped the slate clean for just $140,000. I want to talk about one last thing before we jump to the next section. Did you happen to notice the different account types that Apex discussed in their letter of acceptance, waiver, and consent? They specifically instructed their customers to book short positions in Type 1 cash or short margin accounts. A short margin account is just a margin account that holds short positions. The margin requirements for short positions are more strict than regular margin accounts, so I can see the advantage in separating them. In the AMA with Wes Christian, starting at 7 minutes and 30 seconds in, he specifically discussed how a broker-dealer's margin account is used to locate shares for short sellers. However, the margin account contains shares that were previously pledged by another party. Given the lack of oversight in securities lending, the problem keeps compounding each time a new borrower claims ownership of that share. Now think back to the situation with Apex. They ask their customers to book short positions to a short margin account or a cash account. The user agreement with the margin account allows Apex to continue lending these securities at any time. As discussed with Dr. T and Carl Hagberg, the broker collects interest for lending your margin shares and doesn't pay you anything in return. When multiple locates are authorized for the same share, the broker collects multiple lending fees on the same share. In contrast, the cash account falls under the protection of SEA 15C3-3 and consists of shares that have not been leveraged or lent, like the margin short account. According to West, these shares are segregated and cannot be touched. The broker cannot encumber or restrict them in any way. However, according to West, this is currently happening. He has also explained how Canada has legalized this and currently allows broker-dealers to short sell your cash account shares against you. Alright, I'll stop beating the dead horse regarding short sale indicators and inaccurate submissions of short interest positions. Given the volume of citations we haven't discussed, I'll summarize some of my findings below. Keep in mind these are only for failure to report short interest positions or failure to indicate a short sale modifier. If the violation contained additional information, it's because that citation actually listed additional information. It does not represent an all-inclusive list of short selling violations for these participants. You wanted to know how systemic this problem is, so here you go. Each broker-dealer name is hyperlinked to their FINRA report. So now there's a list here, and I will read through these. So number 1, Barclays. Disclosure 36 submitted 86 short interest positions totaling 41 million shares when the actual short interest position was 44 million shares. Failed to report 8 short interest positions totaling 1.1 million shares. And the penalty for that was a $10,000 fine. So for another one for Barclays, submitted Disclosure 54 submitted an inaccurate short interest position to FINRA and failed to report its short interest positions in 835 positions, totaling 87 million shares, and they got a $150,000 fine for that. BMO Markets submitted short interest positions to FINRA that were incorrect and failed to report to FINRA its short interest positions totaling over 72 million shares for 11 months. That's a $90,000 fine for that. BNP Paribas Securities failed to report to FINRA its own short interest in 2,500 positions totaling over 6 million shares. Got a $30,000 fine. Okay, there's quite a few of these, so I'm not going to read through all of them actually, guys. I will link the post if you want to read through them. But basically the point he's making here is that, they're making a shit ton of money on these plays and they're paying pennies or peanuts in fines. I'm going to stop at H because I'm tired of writing. Hopefully you all understand the point so far. We're only 8 letters into the alphabet and have successfully buried Ken to his waist. The system that is used to mark the proper transaction type, sell by, short sell exempt, etc., is obviously broken. There, I said it. The system is undoubtedly, undoubtedly, inevitably fucked. Regardless of this cause, fraud, or negligence, there are too many firms failing to accomplish a seemingly simple task, the consequences of which are creating far more shares than we can imagine. It's a gigantic domino effect. If you fail to properly mark 1 million short shares and a year goes by without catching the problem, it's already too late. They're like the effing replicators from Stargate. In each of the examples listed above, the short interest in the stock was understated by the number of shares excluded, and that was just a handful. Knowing this, how can someone look at the evidence and say it's trivial? No one knows how systemic this issue is because it is so deeply incorporated in the market that it has become the system itself. Therefore, there is obviously something much deeper going on here. How does one argue against the severity of these problems after reading this? There are far too many things that don't make sense and far too many people turning a blind eye. The only conclusion I keep coming back to is that the people with money know what's going on and are desperately trying to keep it under wraps. So in an effort to prove this, I looked for violations that showed their desperation to protect this effed up system. Buckle up. Tune in for As of Cards Part 3. So yeah, guys, Atobitt always brings the heat. This guy's, the DD Godfather in my opinion. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. My throat is parched after reading all that, honestly. But yeah, guys, please leave a like on the video. Please leave your thoughts On the DDs, you obviously don't have to type a whole thing like he did, but please leave, your short thoughts in the comments below. Let's get some interaction on the video. Please leave a subscribe. Just a reminder, guys, I do have a giveaway. A giveaway is coming up. We did hit 50 subscribers, so this weekend I am going to be doing a draw and picking somebody at random to send them $25 of Ethereum for free. Just as a nice gesture. I would love the support, guys. Again, I'm just an ape trying to bring this service to you. I hope that someone listens to this and it helps them and they learn something from it. I'm just trying to be of service here, guys. Again, please leave your thoughts down in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one, guys. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day.